Hello there, you're welcome to another episode of ToThePointCode. In this episode, we will start a series in which we will create a login system using Expo and React Native. By the end of the series, we would have created the login screens, connected it to a backend, set up the authentication flow, and more. But for this particular episode, we will create all the login and sign up screens that we will need for our application. If you haven't created an app with Expo and React Native before, please check out this video that I will link up here. It will guide you to set up Expo and React Native development on your PC. Without wasting anyone's time, let's get started. So we head to the command line and create our Expo application. We will call our application Flower Crib. This is just an abstract application for, let's say, selling flowers. Once our application has been created successfully, we enter the directory and open it in the code editor. Once the code editor is open, we see all the files and directories that have been generated for us. Now the first thing I do when I'm working on a project is to add a prettier config file to the code. This will ensure that the code looks the same regardless of the PC you are working on. So inside the root directory of our project, I'll create a prettier config file. Inside this file, I'll paste the configuration that I have already copied. You don't have to do this for the code to work. It is just one extra thing that you can do to make the coding more interesting. Once you have done that, let's set up the structure for our work. We'll create some directories and files. First, we'll create a component directory. Inside this component directory, we'll create a styles.js file. We will use this to house the styles of our components. Now we'll create a screens directory. This directory will house the pages of our application. So we basically have three screens: the login, sign up, and a welcome page. So we'll create them. Now I have two images that I'll be using in the application, so I'll copy them into the assets folder. Once you have done that, let's head to the command line and install a few packages. So first of all, we will install Formik. We will use this to handle our form data. In addition to that, we will install styled component. We will use this to style our components. Also, we will install Expo constant. We will need it for some styling in the styles.js file. Once the installation has completed, let's run the project in our emulator and start writing some code. So to start, let's define our colors and create a few components in the styles.js file. But first of all, we import styled components. These will be the colors that we'll be using throughout our application. Now let's destructure the colors so that I'll be able to use them easily by just referring to the names. Now our first component will be a styled container. For that, we'll make use of the view component. So let's import it from React Native. Let's give it some styles. Now we want to give it more padding at the top so that our content will not interfere with the status bar. So we'll make use of constant from Expo constant to be able to get the height of the status bar. So let's import constant from Expo constant. Now get the height from the constant. Now we set the padding at the top to the status bar height. And just to be safe, we'll add 10 and set the unit as pixels. Now for the design we are targeting, we need another container and we'll call it inner container. Once again, we make use of the view component. Let's give it some styles. Now on the login page, we want to have a logo and also a title. So let's create those two components. This will be an image, so we'll use the image from React Native. For now, we just set the width and the height. Also, let's create a title. We'll call it page title. This will be a text. Now let's add the text and the image to the imports. Now let's go to the login.js file and create our component. Now let's import the styled components that we created. Now let's use them in the component. First of all, use our styled container. Now we go on to add our logo. Oh, I forgot to add where we are importing the components from. Now we can go ahead to add our logo. Now because our logo is a local file, that is, the file exists in our code base, we will make use of the source attribute. Inside the source attribute, we will provide a require function and we'll pass the path to the file to our require function. And this file can be found in the assets directory. So we go back a directory to the assets directory and enter the image directory, and our file is called image1.png. Now in addition to the source, we'll add resize mode to the attributes. We'll give it a value of cover. Now below this we add the page title. Our title is Flower Crib. Now to see the output of our components, let's go to the app.js file. Now let's import our login.js file. Remember, it is one of the screens. Now let's replace the content of the app.js file with the login. Once we do that and save, we can see our output in the emulator. We see the image and also the page title. Now for this project, I want to style the status bar in each screen. So I'll copy the status bar import here and paste in the login.js file. Now right below the styled container, I'll put our status bar there, and I'll give it a style of dark. And now we can see that our status bar is looking better and it blends with the background of our page. Now inside the app.js file, let's clear the unused code. Now back in the styles.js file, let's create a subtitle component and also a form area component. The subtitle will be a text. Now the form area will be a view, so we'll call it styled form area. We are using this to set the width of our input fields. Now inside the login.js file, let's import the created components. Now the subtitle will contain account login. Now for the form, we'll make use of the Formik package that we installed. So let's import Formik. Now inside the inner container, let's use the Formik component. Now the Formik component will take some properties. First, it will take an initial values property, and this particular form will have only email and password, so you provide those values. In addition to that, it will take an onSubmit property. This will be a function that will be called when the form is submitted. And this takes in a values parameter. For now, we just output the values to the console. Now inside the Formik component is a function which returns the input fields. So we put our styled form area in it. Now this inner function comes with some parameters as well. So let's destructure them. First of all, it's a handle change function, which will run whenever the values in our input field changes. It also comes with handle blur. The handle blur will run whenever our input field loses focus. Also, we'll have a handle submit. This will run whenever our form is submitted. And lastly, the values. This represents the values of our input fields. So now we need to create the input fields. So let's go below the login component and create an input field component. I'll call it my text input. My text input will take a few properties, so let's destructure them. It will take a label property, an icon, and the other text input props for now. So inside the component, we make use of a view. So let's import the view. Now the other components will be styled components. So let's go to our styles.js file and create them. So first of all, we will style our text input component and we'll call it style text input. Remember, we are getting this from React Native. Let's give it some styles. Also, we create a component for the label. We'll call it styled input label. This will be a text. Also, we create a component for the icon. We'll call it left icon because to be putting the icon on the left side of the input field. This will be a view as well. Now we'll create something similar for the right. We'll use the right one for the eye icon. But for the eye icon, it will be something that will be pressing on. So instead of the view, we want to use touchable opacity for that. So let's import it from React Native. Now let's create a button and also the content of the button, which is the text. We'll call the button styled button. Once again, we use touchable opacity. And for the text in the button, we'll call it button text. Now let's use the component we've created so far. So let's go back to the login.js file. So first of all, we'll put the left icon. But first, let's import them. So first of all, use the left icon. So the left icon that we created was a wrapper. So we pass the icon as a child to it. And we'll get our icons from Expo vector icons. So for our input fields, we want to use icons from oct icons. So we import oct icons from Expo vector icons. Let me take it up instead. I will make use of the oct icon component. So for the name of the icon, we'll pass the icon property that was received. Also, we give it a size of 30. Now it will also take a color property. Now since we want our colors to be consistent, we'll import the colors object from our styles.js file. Actually, we can just add it to the import here. And we can go ahead to destructure the colors that we need from it. So for our icons, we use the brand color. So we pass the brand color to it. After the left icon, we bring our label, which is styled input label. Once again, we will supply the label which was provided as a property. After the label, we want to bring our input field, which we called style text input. Now for this component, we will spread all the properties on it. Now let's try out this component for the email field. So between the style form area, we will use my text input here. So for the label, we'll say email address. For the icon, we'll say mail. Now also give it a placeholder. We also give it a placeholder text color. I'll say dark light. And I have to import it from the colors. Now we need to pass these functions to it. So we pass unchanged text. So the handle change function will take a parameter which is the name of the input field, and our input field is called email. This will be the same for the handle blur. Now it will also take a value property, and we'll get the value from values.email. Also, as an extra property, we can pass a keyboard type. And we'll say email address. So now on saving and refreshing the application, we see that our input field is displayed nicely over here, and also the icon is on the left side. Now let's copy it and do the same for our password field. So we change the label to password, and we change the icon to lock. Also for the placeholder, we'll change it to a bunch of asterisks. Now for the handle change, we'll change the argument to password. We'll get rid of the keyboard type. Now because this is a password field, we want the input to be hidden whenever the user is typing. So we pass another property which is called secure text entry, and this will take a boolean value. So for now, we'll set the value to true. Now trying out the input fields. We see that the password field hides the values that we input in it. Now let's go ahead to add the right icon to the password field. Now since we don't want to apply the eye icon for all the input fields but only the password, we will attach another attribute to the password field and we will call it as password, so that when we receive its password in my text input component, we will know how to handle it differently. So now we'll check if its password is true and return the right icon. But before we can use it, we need to take it in. Now if its password is true, we'll return the right icon component. Now this time for the eye icon, I'll make use of icons. So we import that too from Expo vector icons. Now the size will be 30 as well. And the color will be dark light. Now for the name of the icon, it will be dynamic, because whenever the user presses on the icon, we want to change the icon from maybe the eye to an eye slash or an eye off. So to be able to do this, we'll make use of state here. So we import useStateHook from React. So inside the login component, we'll create the state. We'll use the state to monitor when to hide the password or show the password. And in effect, we can determine which icon to show. So we'll call the state hide password. So our initial value will be true. Now since what controls whether we see the value in the password field or not is the secure text entry, we also pass the state value to it. So instead of true here, we will pass the value of hide password. Also, we will pass the hide password value and also the set function, which is set hide password, to my text input component here, so that it can be accessed and used to handle the right icon here. Oh, I made a typo while spelling ionicons, so let's correct it. Now let's take in the two properties we just passed in. So we take in hide password and set hide password. So once hide password is true, we want to return the name of the icon as mdi_off. That's the name of the icon we want to use when the password is hidden. Now if the password is showing, we want to use mdi. Now while taking in the values, I forgot my comma. Now inside the styles.js file, we forgot to change the left property of the right icon to right. So let's do that. By doing that, our icon should be fixed, and we can see that it's displaying on the right. Now for pressing on the icon to actually work, we need to pass the onPress property to the right icon component. So on press, we want to toggle the value of the hide password. I just toggled word wrap so that we can see all the code here. Now we see that pressing on the icon toggles, and when we type a password in it, it changes from hidden to visible. So it's working as intended. Now let's add the button that we created. Remember, we called it styled button, but we haven't imported them yet, so let's do that. So we import styled button and button text. So the text of our button will be login. Now when the button is pressed, we want to call the handle submit function. Let's add an align content center property to the start button. Sorry, it's align items. Now in between the password field and the login button, we want to put a small text box which will be used to display messages that will come while signing in and signing up. So let's create that. We'll call it message box. Also, we want to create a horizontal line which will display after the login button. So let's create that. We'll just call it line, and it will be a view. So now let's import and use the message box and the line in our login component. For now, message box will just contain 3 dots. And after the start button, we'll put our line. So under the line that we have here, we want to put another button for Google sign in, and also put some text which contains a link to our sign up page. So let's copy our start button here and paste it for the Google sign in. Now we want to add a Google icon to it, but this time we want to take it from Fontisto, so we import it from Expo vector icons. Also, we want to make use of the primary color, so let's import it from our colors. Now inside the start button, let's add the icon. Now for the icon and the text in the sign in with Google button, we want to style them a bit differently. So let's add some properties to it, which we will use to style it differently in the style.js file. So for the button, we'll pass a property Google and set the value to true. We'll do the same for the button text. Now let's go to the styles.js file and style them. Now we check if the property Google has been set to true. So if the property Google has been set to true, then we will return the following styles. Now we'll do the same for the button text. Now the button is looking as we want it to look. Now for the text that we'll be putting under the sign in button, we'll create a few more styled components which we'll use to display the text correctly. So the first of all, we'll create a container and we'll call it extra view. We'll create another component and call it extra text. Now for the button which will lead us to the sign up page, we want to style it to look like a text. So we will call that text link, but we'll make use of a touchable opacity. Finally, for the content of our text link, we'll call it text link content. So back in the login.js file, let's import them and use them. So right below the last start button, we'll put our extra view. Inside the extra view, we'll put our extra text. And this will say, don't have an account already. We'll follow this with a text link. we see that the text and the link are displaying nicely. So basically we are done for the login page. Now let's move on to the sign up page. The sign up will be very similar to the login. So let's copy the content of the login.js file and paste in the signup.js file. Now to start, let's change the name of the component. And let's change the subtitle to account sign up. Now in the app.js file, let's import the sign up component. Let's replace the login here with sign up. Now in the signup.js file, let's copy and paste the input fields a few times. So for the email field, we'll copy and paste it twice. Now for the password, we'll copy and paste it once. Now for lack of space, we'll get rid of the logo. Now we don't need the sign in with Google here, so we'll get rid of it. For the extra text, instead of don't have an account already, we will change it to already have an account. And we'll change the button to login. Now starting at the bottom, the second password field will be changed to confirm password. So we change the label to confirm password. And we'll change the field name to confirm password as well. Now for the text input field, we will change it to date of birth. And we'll change the icon to calendar. For the placeholder, we'll just put year, month and day. For the field, we'll call it date of birth. We'll get rid of the keyboard type. Now for the values, we'll change it to date of birth for now. I'm saying for now because we'll change it later on. For the second field, we'll leave it like that and we'll change the first field. We'll change the first field to full name. For the icon, we'll change it to person. And for the placeholder, we'll change it to Richard Barnes. We'll change the field names as well. Now let's add the fields to the initial values. Now the input fields are looking good, but for the date of birth field, we want to do a little bit more. We want to pull up the calendar whenever the user presses on the date of birth field so that you'll be able to choose the date of birth from the calendar instead of just manually typing it. So to do that, we'll make use of the datetimepicker. So to be able to use it, we need to install it. So we head back to the command line. Now we terminate our server and install the package. I use Ctrl+C to cancel it. Now once the package has installed successfully, we can go back to the documentation and visit the usage. From the usage, we can get access to the import code. It is a bit long, so I didn't want to type it. So now we'll paste this command at the top of our file. I'll do it just below the colors. Also on the usage page, we can get access to the datetimepicker component being used, so we'll copy that too. For this one, we'll paste it below our subtitle. Now for the datetimepicker, we need some more state variables, so let's create them. First of all, we'll create this show state variable. Secondly, we'll create another state variable to hold the current value or the current date of the picker. So we'll call it date. So we'll pass a new date object to it, and we'll put any random date there. So I'll just put 2000 January 1. Remember the 0 here represents the first month. So the datetimepicker needs this value to be able to work. But also, I'll create another state variable to store the actual date of birth, which has been chosen by the user. So in addition to the state variables, we'll create two functions. The first one will be onChange. This function will run whenever the value of the date picker changes. And this will take a parameter of event and also selected date. So if the value changes, you want to set a current date to the selected date here, or to the initial date if no date has been selected actually. Once we've done that, we want to set show to false, that is hide the datetimepicker. Also, we want to set the date to the current date. Also, the date of birth that will be sent actually, we want to set that to the current date also. So another reason for creating this date of birth state is that we don't want the initial date here to be displaying in our date of birth field. That's why we are creating a new state with an undefined value. I will create another function and call it show date picker. Now this function will set the value of the show state to true. Now let's make a few changes. For the mode property of the datetimepicker, we'll change it to date. Now before we continue, let's connect our app back to the Metro server. We can see that it cannot connect to the Metro server. So let's go to the command line and start the server again. We use Expo start. Now let's make a few changes to our date of birth input field. So remember how we pass the property is password to the input field, so that we can make some changes whenever the input field is a password. We will do the same for the date of birth. So we pass the property is date to it. So if its date is true, then we'll make some changes to the input field. Now for the value, we'll change it to the DOB state that we created. So to avoid getting an undefined value, we will check if the DOB has been set. So if the DOB has been set, it will be a date object. So we'll apply a method to it to convert it to string. So the method is toDateString. Otherwise, it will just return an empty string. Also, because we want the date to be picked directly from the date picker, we don't want to make the field editable, so we will set editable to false. Now the showDatePicker function that we created here, we'll pass it to the input field as well. Now let's take in the isDate and showDatePicker in the myText input component. Now if the input field is date, we want to wrap our style text input in a touchable opacity component, so that when the user presses on it, we'll be able to trigger the showDatePicker to pop up the date picker. So we import touchable opacity from React Native. So first of all, let's cut this component. For the first condition, we'll check if its date has not been set or its date is false. So if its date is false, we'll just pass the input component that we cut. Otherwise, if its date is true, we'll wrap the whole thing in the touchable opacity. Now for the onPressed property, we'll pass the showDatePicker to it. Now let's try out the input fields. Now when we click on the date of birth field, we see that the calendar pops up and it gives us the opportunity to choose the date. So let me choose any random date. So on pressing on OK, we see that the value of the date of birth field has been updated, and this is exactly what we want. Now let's move on to the welcome screen. Once again, it is a bit similar to the login page. So let's copy the login content and paste in the welcome.js file. So in the app.js file, let's import the welcome component. Now the welcome page will be slightly different, so we'll create a few more components just for the welcome page. So let's go to our styles.js file. So first of all, we'll create a welcome container. This will be a bit similar to the inner container. Since it's a bit similar to the inner container, we can build on that. Also, we create another image component and call it avatar. Also, we create another component and call it welcome image. Also, we make a slight adjustment to the page title and the subtitle if a welcome property has been passed. So we check if props.welcome is true. Sorry, these properties are supposed to be for the subtitle. So we change the properties of the page title. We just add a font size. Back to the welcome page, let's make these changes. So for the welcome page, we want to put a big image at the top, and this image will cover the top portion of our application and enter the status bar. So from the start, we will get rid of the styled container because we will not use it. Also, let's get rid of the input field and buttons. Let's replace the Formik with a welcome container. Let's change the login button to log out. For now, we just use an arrow function as a placeholder for the onPress property. We also get rid of the sign in with Google and also the extra view. Let's bring the line above the button. Now let's import the welcome container that we just used. Also, let's import the welcome image. Now let's change the page logo to the avatar. So therefore, let's import the avatar. Now let's cut and put the avatar in the styled form area. Now the page title and subtitle, let's bring it inside the welcome container. Now let's attach the property welcome equals true. Let's change the value of the page title to welcome body. Also, let's change the subtitle to a name. For now, I'll just put Olga Simpson. Let's copy and paste it. This will be for the email. Now on top of the welcome container, let's use our welcome image. Let's copy the properties of the avatar. The only difference is that we'll be using image 2 over here. Now as you can see, our image is showing and it has entered the status bar. But now we can't see the content of the status bar. So now let's change the style to light. And after doing that, we see that it's looking way better. Now let's get rid of the unused values and imports, and we'll be done for this episode. So we get rid of the input field here. Also, we get rid of the state variables here. We didn't use the colors, so we can get rid of them. Also, the view was not used. Then in the import, we can get rid of the imports that were not used. So we are done, but before we end, let's go into the app.js file and render the login component so that we observe something. Let's render the sign up component instead. Okay, so on the sign up page, let's observe something. When we are trying to enter something into the input fields, the virtual keyboard comes up. But when it gets to the password section, we see that the keyboard is covering the input fields and we cannot see whatever we are typing. This is an issue and it gives off a bad user experience. So in the next episode, we will see how we fix this and get the keyboard out of the way while an input field is in focus and we are typing.